Hey, welcome back. I'm glad you're here again tonight. Maybe you're lying on your side, or maybe you're curled up under a blanket that's just warm enough to make you feel like you're wrapped in a secret. Good. That's exactly how I want you to be. Comfortable, safe, and ready to drift, because we're about to slip into a part of history that you won't find scribbled neatly in school textbooks. So, before we go further, take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop. If there's a lamp glowing in your room, maybe turn it down a notch. Let the shadows spread just a little. Shadows are good company for stories like this. They hold whispers, echoes of things once done behind heavy oak doors. Things that flickered like candlelight, but never quite went out. Tonight, we're going to step softly into a royal chamber that smells faintly of lavender oil and cold stone. You can almost hear the gentle hiss of the fireplace, logs crackling, a fire so small it barely holds back the chill. There's a velvet curtain drawn halfway across a tall window, moonlight slipping through, spilling silver across the stone floor, catching on the embroidery of a robe thrown carelessly over a carved chair. Can you picture it? This is not the stiff, polished throne room you might imagine. No polished boots, no clanging armor. This is where a king comes to breathe, to shed the heavy cloak of crowns and titles, to whisper secrets to himself in the quiet hours when the court is asleep and no one knocks on the door demanding decrees or taxes or war. Maybe you'd expect this king, let's call him Henry tonight, why not, to be lounging in a massive bed with dark fur blankets and towering pillars. And he is, but not quite the way you'd think, because our Henry, tonight, is not in his brocade doublet or chainmail. No. Picture him sitting at the edge of the bed, one slipper half off, fingertips tracing the delicate threads of a silk gown draped across his lap. He lifts it slowly, the fabric almost sighs as it slips through his hands. It's lighter than anything he's worn all day, softer than the scratchy wool tunic he wore to the council meeting where his advisors droned on about wheat shortages and mercenary payments. He hated that tunic. It itched at the collar and made his shoulders ache. But this silk gown, stitched with tiny golden vines that wind around the hem like secret roots. This feels like air against his skin. Imagine him standing now, feet bare on the cold stones. He shivers at first. The draft sneaks under the heavy door, carrying with it the smell of rain that taps gently at the castle's shuttered windows. His breath clouds for a moment, a ghost drifting up to the beams above. But when he pulls the gown over his head, carefully so the embroidery doesn't catch on his ring, there's a quiet hush that falls over the room. No one's watching, or so he hopes. Outside the door, a loyal servant dozes off on a wooden bench, arms crossed, a candle guttering in his hand. He's seen too much, but his lips are sealed by loyalty or fear. Maybe both. Inside, Henry turns to the mirror, an old, slightly warped piece of polished metal framed by tarnished silver. He sees himself, but not quite himself, a version that feels softer, stranger, maybe more real. A king with a crown is just a king, but a king with a silk gown and bare feet, that's someone who remembers what it's like to be more than a title. He runs a hand through his hair. It's longer than the court barbers would like, brushing his collarbones. He lets it fall loose, imagines it tickling his neck as he moves. He picks up a little vial from the table, rose water, gifted by a merchant from the East who thought it would delight the queen. Maybe it did, but tonight it delights him more. A dab on the wrists, another behind the ears. The scent lifts the stale air of stone and smoke. Now, with the fire crackling low and the gown flowing like liquid moonlight around his ankles, Henry sits back down. He draws his knees up, tucks the hem beneath his feet to keep them warm. For a moment, he imagines no armies, no whispered plots, no endless parchments to sign, just silk, warmth, and the soft hush of rain tapping at the window like an old friend. Isn't that a curious thought? A king, wrapped in softness, trying to remember the shape of himself without the iron cage of crowns and scepters. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hoots, as if to say, yes, yes, keep your secrets, but the night always knows. So tonight, as you lie there, warm and quiet, maybe you'll think of Henry and his silk gown. Maybe you'll remember that sometimes the people who seem the strongest carry the heaviest longing to feel weightless, just for a while. Maybe you'll smile at how delightfully human that is, to want to slip into something softer, to step out of the roles the world shoves you into. The candle flickers, the rain falls. The gown whispers against the floor as Henry moves. And you can let your eyes drift closed now if you like. We're only just beginning this journey into whispered corridors and secret silks. There's so much more waiting in the dark corners of these ancient halls. So rest easy. You're exactly where you need to be. Next, let's drift deeper into this chamber, where the shadows press up against thick stone walls and the fire does its best to fight back the cold. The flickering candles, they're the real storytellers tonight. Each tiny flame dances nervously, sending little waves of golden light across the king's face. They make him look softer than he ever appears during daylight. Softer, but somehow lonelier too. Picture this. Henry sits hunched at the edge of his massive bed, the silk gown draped over him like a second skin. The hem pulls around his bare ankles, gathering in soft ripples that catch the fire's glow. He's leaning forward, elbows on knees, fingers worrying the edge of the fabric the way a child might fuss with a blanket. He breathes out, a deep, shaky sigh that fogs the polished mirror opposite him. There's a hush to the room that only old castles know, that hollow echo that lives in high ceilings and thick tapestries. If you listen close enough, you might hear it. The faint drip of rainwater sneaking in through a cracked window, the distant clink of armor from the guard at the far end of the corridor, the steady tick of a clock that sits on the mantel. A gift from a foreign prince who didn't know the king hated its ceaseless counting. But Henry keeps the clock anyway. Maybe because the tick-tock reminds him he's still here, still flesh and blood under all that silk and gold. Still a man with skin that flushes when it's cold and warms when the fire's close enough. Now, imagine this room isn't just stone and velvet. It's alive with anxious thoughts. His mind hums louder than the fire. He sees himself in the mirror, and for a moment, he wonders, is this what they'll remember? The king who dressed like a queen? The king who sat alone, wrapped in borrowed lace, whispering to shadows. It's not shame that pinches at him. No, shame left a long time ago, carried away by 100 battles fought in muddy fields and candle-lit council rooms where men in stiff collars argued about taxes and loyalty. What presses on him now is something deeper, something that tastes like fear but isn't quite that. It's the weight of being seen, truly seen, by no one but the walls and the flame. He rises, the silk slipping down his shoulders for a heartbeat. There's a pale stripe of skin that almost glows in the firelight. He tugs the gown back up, wrapping it tight around himself like armor softer than iron. He moves to the table by the window, where another candle fights to stay alive. He cups his hand around the flame, watching how it bends and dances in the small cave of his palm. He thinks about how a candle is so much like a king. Stand too straight, burn too bright, and you gutter out before the dawn. But let yourself flicker, hide behind a cupped hand for a while, and maybe you'll make it through the longest night. Outside, the wind rattles the wooden shutters, begging to come inside. Henry presses his forehead to the cold glass, peering through a gap where the shutter doesn't quite close. The courtyard below is empty, puddles catching bits of moonlight. a lone guard trudging past with his spear dragging a line through the mud. For a heartbeat, Henry imagines throwing open the window, stepping out into the rain in nothing but his gown. How would it feel? Cold droplets kissing his shoulders, silk clinging to his skin like a second, shivering heartbeat. He'd be weightless then, no crown, no advisors, no one calling him your majesty. Just Henry, a man in the rain, washed clean of titles. But he doesn't open the window. Instead, he slides the shutter back in place with a soft thud, turns away, and drags the heavy chair closer to the fire. The embers crackle and shift, a hiss of pine resin, a tiny pop that makes him flinch like a boy caught with his hand in the honey jar. He sinks into the chair, tucks his feet up, curls deeper into the folds of silk. The candle beside him flickers again, so thin now it's only a stub of wax drowning in its own pool. He watches the flames sway, hypnotized. He wonders if anyone, centuries from now, will think about this moment. The king wrapped in a gown, worrying his lip raw, hoping the world outside his walls never truly finds out who he is when the candles burn low. Somewhere deep in the castle, a clock strikes the hour. The sound floats down the corridor, slipping under his door like a ghostly reminder. Time waits for no king, not even the anxious ones in silken armor. But here, in this quiet chamber, time feels soft, like it's dozing off with him. So, as you lie there listening, maybe you can imagine the way those flickering candles look reflected in his tired eyes. Little fires fighting the dark, just like him. Maybe you'll remember that even the ones who rule need something warm and fragile to hold on to when the night grows too heavy. And maybe, just maybe, you'll close your eyes now too, letting the flicker of his secrets warm you from afar. The gown whispers against his skin, the candle sighs, and outside, the rain keeps tapping at the world that waits for him come morning. But for now, he's just Henry, soft, secret, and safely hidden in the hush of silk and shadows. Meanwhile, just beyond the sanctuary of Henry's flickering chamber, the castle doesn't sleep as soundly as you might think. Old stone keeps secrets like a miser hoarding coins. Every corridor, every archway, every velvet curtain is stitched with whispers that never quite die. And if you listen, really listen, you might hear the quiet scurry of slippered feet or the muffled giggle of a courtier leaning too close to a friend's ear. Picture the great hall after the last course has been cleared. The roasted meats, the trenchers of cheese, the wine that leaves stains on pale lips. The courtiers linger there, lounging on benches worn smooth by generations of noble backsides. They're draped in fur-trimmed cloaks and jewel-toned tunics. But under the warmth, a chill runs through them that has nothing to do with the night air. Because they've heard things they're not supposed to know, but they always do. The walls are thin between a king's secrets and his servants' gossip. And so, in hushed voices, they trade tiny scandals like precious spices, the missing pearls from the queen's chamber, the way the king's boots stayed neatly lined up outside his door all evening. Meaning he never left, but someone else might have slipped in. Imagine a knot of them gathered near a torch sconce, its flames sputtering as though it too wants to hear every word. One young noble, his hair tied back with a satin ribbon, leans closer to a lady whose sleeves drag the floor when she moves. He whispers something, eyes glinting like candle wax before it melts. Her gloved hand darts to her mouth, a stifled laugh that comes out more like a gasp. It's true, she breathes, as though saying it aloud might summon the king himself from behind the tapestry. He shrugs, eyes darting toward the dark end of the corridor. True enough to be careful. And careful they are, because a whisper in the wrong ear can cost you your head, or worse, your place at the next banquet. Some rumors come wrapped in silks, more dangerous than any blade. So they gossip like cats pawing at a half-dead mouse, circling, pouncing, but never quite finishing the kill. Further down the hall, a servant girl scrubs at a sticky patch of wine that someone spilled when the laughter grew too loud. She's bent low, her rag dipping into a bucket of lukewarm water. She tries not to hear the snippets drifting her way, but they slip in anyway. Something about the king's fingers tangled in lace, about a gown that smelled of rosewater, about the royal tailor being summoned at midnight with bolts of silk no one dares record in the account's ledger. She tucks the whispers away, folding them into the hidden corners of her mind, where they'll keep her company when she's alone, or maybe buy her a favor when the time is right. And imagine the walls themselves. These old stones have heard it all. They've absorbed centuries of secrets. Queens who cried alone in chambers lined with ermine. Princes who vanished in the dark. Counselors who swore loyalty with one hand and twisted the knife with the other. Compared to that, a king in a gown is just another hush to add to the echoing collection. Out in the courtyard, the guards swap tales too. Their armor clinks when they shift from foot to fight the creeping chill. One of them, older than the rest, spits into the shadows. "Let him wear what he wants," he mutters, rubbing his hands together for warmth. A gown doesn't dull a blade, does it? The others grunt in agreement, but you can feel the tremor underneath. They know they stand between the court's gossip and the king's secrets. And secrets are heavy when you wear them like chainmail under your skin. Back inside, the courtiers drift away from the hall in pairs and trios, voices lowered to a conspiratorial hum. Candles are snuffed one by one, but the whispers don't die with the light. They crawl into bed with their owners, settle on pillows, curl into dreams that feel like forbidden touches. And all the while, high above them, a lone window glows. The king's chamber, just a flicker of firelight and the ghost of a silk hem brushing across cold stone. Some swear they've heard the floorboards creak when no footsteps echo down the corridor. Others say the smell of rosewater drifts out under the door like a sigh. Of course, in the morning, no one will speak of it outright. They'll bow deep, eyes to the floor, lips tight with politeness. But over the next goblet of wine, in the next quiet corner, the stories will bloom again like wildflowers poking through cracks in the courtyard flagstones. Because in a place like this, rumors feed the hungry just as much as bread and wine do. And the king's secrets, wrapped in silk, whispered in candlelight, are a feast no one can resist. So next time you hear a creak in your hallway at night, or catch the scent of something sweet that shouldn't be there, maybe you'll think of these courtiers, tiptoeing between loyalty and betrayal, trading in shadows while their king sits alone, draped in the only thing that feels like freedom. And maybe you'll pull your blanket closer, grateful your secrets can sleep safe under your pillow, at least for tonight. Next, we drift even further back, not just behind the heavy oak door of Henry's candlelit chamber, but behind the centuries themselves, into the deep, root-like threads that twist beneath every stone in this cold, old castle. Because before there were kings draped in silk gowns and courtiers whispering behind goblets of wine, there were rituals, strange, half-forgotten things, older than any single crown, older than the pages the scribes dared ink. Picture this: a clearing in the woods long before the castle's foundation stones were ever laid. The air damp with mist, the earth soft beneath bare feet. Figures move through the gloom, cloaks heavy with dew. No iron crowns here, no stiff collars, just garlands of woven flowers drooping against smooth foreheads, bracelets of bronze clinking with each careful step. You can almost smell the wood smoke, the damp moss, the faint sweetness of crushed herbs burned on a stone altar. The chanting is low, half song, half murmur, weaving through the trees like a lullaby for the hidden things that listen from the dark. Back then, to rule was not to wear armor and bark orders from a gilded throne. It was to stand between worlds, to borrow a bit of the goddess's grace, to channel a hint of the spirit that made the crops grow and the rivers run true. And to do that, you had to soften your edges, slip out of the rigid skin of your everyday self. So they wore robes, flowing linen dyed with rare plants that stained the fabric like watercolor bleeding through parchment. They painted their eyes, ringed their wrists and bells in bronze that jingled like tiny secrets. Some say the chieftains who would one day be called kings walked into the sacred circle draped in dresses that shimmered under the moonlight. Not to mock the women, oh no, but to become more than either man or woman. To be, for a moment, the bridge between the sharp blade and the gentle hand. Imagine the ritual fires flickering while a young leader steps barefoot across warm stones, the hem of his gown brushing his ankles, sparks flying up to kiss his skin. He lifts his arms, bracelets clinking, and for a heartbeat he feels the ancient power in his blood, something wild and fluid that laughs at crowns and scepters. Of course, when dawn comes, the ritual ends. The robes are folded away, the flower garlands dry and crumble, the bronze bells quiet again. But the memory clings, hidden under layers of duty and iron and gold. And so, centuries later, when a king like Henry draws a silk gown around his shoulders and feels his breath slow, it's not just a whim. It's an echo, a whisper from the deep roots that say, once long ago, you were more than this. And you can be again. Back in the castle's drafty halls, a scholar might stumble across scraps of parchment in the dusty archives, records half erased by time and rats, scribbled by monks who didn't quite know what to make of what they heard in the villages beyond the walls. They wrote in crabbed Latin about strange rites, effeminate garments, men who prayed to the old mother under the new church's roof. They left out the shivers down their spines, the way the villagers' songs lingered like a spell on their cloaks as they trudged home. But these old stories never really die, do they? They curl up in the corners of the human mind, waiting for a crack in the armor, waiting for a king to find himself alone at midnight, heart pounding in a hush, fingers brushing velvet sleeves that feel like a memory. And when Henry stands at his window, silk wrapped around him like a second skin, he's not just indulging a royal fancy. No, he's stepping into that old circle, just for a breath, just for a heartbeat. He's reaching back through the centuries for a taste of that ancient hush, that sacred blur where kings and goddesses shared the same heartbeat under the same flickering flame. So next time you light a candle before sleep, watch how the flame bends and sways, how it seems to breathe when you do. Think about those old rituals that refuse to be buried by crowns and iron walls. Think of soft linen, bronze bells, secret flowers crushed under bare feet in the moonlight. And remember, long before crowns weighed down men's heads, a simple gown could lift their souls closer to something untamed, something more real than any throne could ever hold. Let that thought drift with you now, as the shadows deepen and the old stories wrap themselves around your dreams, whispering that you too are more than the shape the world sees. Just like Henry and the chieftains and the hidden fires that still flicker somewhere deep beneath these stones. But here's the curious part. While old rituals might hum like a heartbeat under cold castle stones, the present always finds its own peculiar ways to echo them, sometimes in the most unexpected corners of daily life. Imagine, if you will, the hush that falls over the royal apartments long after the last courtier has been chased out by the toll of the midnight bell. Picture the queen's wardrobe standing there, a carved oak giant pressed against the wall, its hinges creaking when coaxed open by a nervous hand. Henry stands before it now, our restless king wrapped in his silk gown, the fire's glow painting his cheeks with soft gold. The floor beneath him is cold enough that his toes curl into the thick fur rug, but there's a warmth that grows in the hollow of his chest when he pulls open the wardrobe doors. Inside, a riot of colors and textures, velvets and emerald and deep wine, satins that catch the lamplight and bend it like a prism, lace collars so delicate they look like frost spun by fairies. The queen's gowns hang here in neat rows, their sleeves falling like the arms of sleeping maidens, each hem stitched with little blossoms, each bodice perfumed with the scent of rosewater, lavender, and a whisper of musk. Picture him reaching out. He hesitates at first, fingers hovering over a gown the color of a bruised plum, the silk so fine it shivers under his breath. He could call for a seamstress to make him something identical, tailored for a king's broad shoulders and long arms. But no, there's something more thrilling, more intimate in borrowing what was never meant for him. He slips it off its carved hanger. The faint rustle of the fabric fills the quiet chamber like a sigh. He presses it to his face, inhales the ghost of the queen's perfume, that sweet edge of something floral with a bite of sharp spice underneath. It's the smell of a woman who knows exactly how to wield softness as a blade, who can turn a gaze into a dagger and a touch into an unspoken treaty. In this moment, Henry is both king and thief, lover and lone child rifling through an elder sister's treasures. He imagines how she wears it, head held high, the delicate weight of the necklace brushing the hollow of her throat, the soft murmur of admiration that trails behind her as she sweeps through the court. He lets the gown slip over his shoulders, the sleeves too long, the bodice tight across his chest in a way that makes his breath catch. The hem pools on the floor, trailing behind him like a secret the stones are eager to swallow. He moves to the tall mirror, not the cold, polished shield he uses to inspect the fit of his armor, but a slender glass framed by carved flowers and winged cherubs. This was the queen's mirror once, a gift from a Venetian merchant who'd promised it could trap beauty inside its reflection. Imagine him there, studying his own shape. The candlelight flickers, dancing across silk and skin, turning him into something half familiar and half dream. The king who slices through rebellion with a single decree is gone. In his place stands a figure draped in borrowed petals, soft where he's usually steel. And yet, or maybe because of it, he feels more real than he is all day. Outside the wardrobe, a silk shawl lies tangled across a cushioned stool. He picks it up, drapes it over his shoulders, the fringe tickling his neck. On the dressing table sits a tiny bottle of the queen's favorite scent, rose and clove, they say, mixed by an apothecary who swore it was inspired by the Garden of Eden itself. He uncorks it, dabs a drop behind each ear at the base of his throat. The warmth of his skin releases the perfume, carrying it into the air like a ghost slipping past the guards who stand dumb and blind outside his door. For a heartbeat, you can see him smile, a small, private thing. He imagines stepping into the council chamber like this. Rings on every finger, skirts swaying, perfume curling into the noses of old men who'd clutch their prayer beads in horror. Would they dare look him in the eye? He laughs under his breath, the sound swallowed by velvet drapes and the heavy tapestries that line the walls. He slips deeper into the wardrobe, fingertips brushing the cool silk of other gowns, the rustle of beads stitched by hands far gentler than his. He thinks about the seamstresses, their needles dancing through fabric while they traded stories about whose child was sick, whose husband had drunk too much ale the night before. How many secrets were sewn into these seams? How many prayers? How many sighs of longing that would never see the light of day? It makes him feel close to them, those invisible women bending over a single flickering candle, their eyes straining, fingers pricked red. It makes him feel, for one secretive moment, more human than the crown on his brow ever could. In the hush of that candlelit chamber, the perfume soaks into his skin. The silk whispers when he moves, a sound softer than his own breath. He drifts back to the fire, sinking onto the fur rug, gown pooling around him like a sea of stolen petals. For tonight, there is no queen to miss her robe, no eyes to widen in scandal. There is only Henry, warm, perfumed, wrapped in the comfort of what was never meant for him, but somehow fits all the same. And you, tucked into your blankets now, can hold that image close. A king at his most powerful, not with sword in hand, but draped in silk, skin fragrant with rose and clove, heart pounding like an old drum, echoing the rituals that never really die. Maybe if you breathe deeply enough, you'll catch that scent too, sweet, spicy, a secret note that says sometimes the truest strength comes wrapped in softness you're not supposed to touch. So breathe, and let the stolen perfume drift through your dreams tonight. A reminder that we are all, in the quiet dark, so much more than what we dare show the world by daylight. Now, imagine the hush that clings to a great hall before the king arrives. The long tables draped in linen stiff with embroidery, plates of pewter polished so bright they catch the torchlight and bounce it around the vaulted ceiling like restless ghosts. There's the warm smell of roasted meats, boar glazed in honey, duck stuffed with apples, a whole trout resting on a bed of herbs that look as fresh as a meadow in spring, even though the world outside is locked in a chill that creeps under every door. The courtiers gather in slow drifts, like flocks of nervous birds. They stand in clusters, adjusting the cuffs of their brocade sleeves, pretending to fuss over their goblets of watered wine, when really, their eyes flick again and again to the tall chair at the head of the table, the king's chair. Tonight, Henry will come late. He always does when the mood strikes him this way. The low buzz of chatter has that strained edge. Everyone knows something is different tonight. Servants scurry along the walls, eyes lowered, hands steady as they light new candles and ladle steaming soup into bowls that will cool before anyone dares take a sip. And then the hush. A flicker in the corridor. The great door swings open on its groaning hinges. In steps the king, but not the king they expect. Not the broad-shouldered monarch in his heavy cloak trimmed with wolf fur. Not the iron-hearted ruler who clinks with every move because of the chainmail hidden under his embroidered surcoat. No, tonight, Henry glides in draped in a gown the color of moonlit violets, a sheen of silk that catches the firelight and scatters it across the floor like a spilled basket of stars. The sleeves, long and open, brush his wrists when he lifts a hand to acknowledge the bows and curtsies that ripple through the hall like a wave, trying not to break. Around his throat, a thin gold chain nestles just above the delicate lace collar. Lace stolen, perhaps, from the queen's wardrobe, or maybe made just for him by trembling hands that never thought they'd see it worn this way. He does not hurry. He does not slouch. He walks the length of that endless table as if the hush were his cloak, his crown, his shield. His slippered feet make no sound on the rushes scattered across the flagstones. Some say they hear the faintest rustle of silk as he passes, softer than a whisper. Imagine what it must feel like for the guest seated closest to him. The nobleman who once bragged he'd seen the king cut down a rebel with a single stroke. Now he stares at his trencher, fingers drumming nervously along the edge of his wine goblet. The lady to his right dares a glance, eyelashes fluttering as she tries to drink in the soft drape of the gown without letting her face betray a hint of scandal. No one speaks of it, not directly. It would be a dangerous sort of bravery to be the first to lift a mocking eyebrow or let slip a barbed joke. They all remember what happened to the last fool who mistook the king's softness for weakness. His head still decorates a pike on the far side of the courtyard, eyes empty sockets that watch every guest come and go. So they bow lower, speak sweeter, and pretend not to notice how the scent of rose and clove clings to the king's every breath. Henry takes his place at the head of the table. He does not tuck the silk away or hide the bracelets that jangle gently when he lifts his goblet. The flickering light plays at his throat, catches the pale line of his collarbone half revealed by the way the gown slips off one shoulder. He raises the goblet and smiles. The kind of smile that could be blessing or threat, depending on which rumor you cling to most. The musicians tucked in the gallery above strike up a gentle tune. Strings and pipes, a lullaby for the weary. Servants slip around, pouring more wine, setting down platters piled high with steaming pies and sweet pastries dusted with crushed sugar that melts on the tongue. No one dares ask him why he chose to dress this way tonight. Instead, they fill their mouths with honeyed words and roasted pork, laughter blooming and short, nervous bursts that fade the moment the king's eyes flick their way. He speaks when he wants to, voice smooth, softer than they expect, like velvet wrapped around a dagger. Picture him plucking grapes from a silver bowl, skin of the fruit splitting under his teeth, juice running down to stain the lace at his wrist. He doesn't mind the stain, the sweet stickiness. He wipes it away with a swipe of the sleeve, unconcerned that the fabric was never meant for rough use. A servant rushes to offer a clean cloth, eyes fixed firmly on the floor. What must they think, these courtiers trained to see power as iron and blood and steel? How does it rattle them to see it clad instead in softness? A king swathed in silk, yet still holding them all in the palm of his jeweled hand. Somewhere down the table, a young page slips a glance too long. The page's breath catches in his throat when Henry's gaze lands on him. Not unkind, not sharp, just knowing. The boy flushes crimson, bowing his head so quickly his hair falls forward like a curtain. Henry simply tilts his head, a secret smile ghosting the corner of his mouth. A reminder that a king can be unpredictable, and that is sometimes the sharpest blade of all. And so the banquet stretches on, heavy with food no one really tastes, music that covers up the sound of hearts thudding in rib cages too tight. When the final course is cleared, candied almonds, figs soaked in spiced wine, the guests shuffle out one by one into the corridor's drafts, chins tucked low so no one sees the questions trembling behind their eyes. But the echo of the silk remains, the rustle of the gown, the glint of a delicate chain at a monarch's throat. These linger like perfume long after the torches sputter out. And somewhere, deep in the hush of the sleeping castle, the king sits again by the fire, the hem of his gown trailing like a comet's tail across the cold stone. He knows the whispers will swell like a tide come morning, but that is a problem for another day. Tonight, in the hush of velvet and flickering flames, power is a soft thing, and it dares everyone to look away. So as you drift deeper under your blanket, think of that banquet where no one dared to stare too long. Think of the king who let his silk speak louder than any sword. And know that sometimes the things we do not understand are what keep the world trembling gently on its axis, like a candle's flame, always dancing, never still. Next, let's draw the curtain aside on someone who rarely gets their name written down in the fat, gilded books that line the king's library. Someone who drifts like a shadow through the corridors, carrying more secrets than any crown could bear without cracking under the weight. Picture him, Thomas, not a nobleman or a cunning advisor, but a simple servant boy born in the dark belly of this castle, where the kitchens boil at dawn and the laundresses curse the endless parade of silk and velvet that needs washing. He's lean, always half-hungry no matter how many scraps he steals from the edge of the larder. His hands are raw from hauling firewood up staircases too grand for boots that leak water through every seam. And yet, Thomas knows things the nobles do not. He moves unnoticed, a ghost with blistered feet and eyes that see what they shouldn't. Imagine him now, standing just beyond the king's chamber door, a bundle of fresh logs pressed against his chest, the smell of pine resin sticky on his fingers. He supposed a knock to be announced by the guard posted at the corner, but the guard is dozing, chin to chest, snoring like a distant forge bellows. Thomas shifts his weight, pressing his ear to the thick oak door. Inside, the soft hiss of the fire, the faint scrape of silk on stone, a sound he's grown to recognize. He imagines the king there, perched on that fur rug, a pool of violet or ivory draped around his ankles. He can almost see the delicate lace cuffs fluttering as the king lifts his hands to adjust the fall of fabric around his shoulders. There's a strange intimacy to it, a closeness Thomas never asked for but cannot unlearn. He knows how the queen's wardrobe smells when it's opened under moonlight. He knows the shape of the king's footsteps when they drift from the bed to the mirror and back again, slippered and soft. He knows when the king's sighs come heavy, like a man shedding iron plates he never chose to wear. Sometimes, Thomas wishes he could scrub these secrets away the way he scrubs soot from a hearth. But secrets cling to him like the scent of smoke in his clothes. He carries them through the maze of corridors, down into the kitchens where the older servants watch him with narrowed eyes, eyes that have seen too much themselves but learned long ago to keep their tongues still. He's careful, though. He does not tell the scullery girls who giggle over their pails of dirty dishwater. He does not whisper to the steward who always smells like sour wine. He does not even murmur it to himself when he curls up on his narrow pallet at night. But in the hush, as his eyes slip closed, he sees silk. He smells rosewater and clove. He wonders if he will wake up one day with the weight of those secrets pressing so heavy on his chest that he can no longer stand. Now picture this. One evening, a courtier, plump and red-faced, soft with the smugness of someone born behind stone walls, catches Thomas in the corridor just as he's emptying the king's hearth ashes into a battered iron bucket. The courtier leans close, breath reeking of spiced wine, voice sticky sweet like honey that hides a worm. "So, our good King Henry has his tastes." The question slithers from the man's lips like a snake testing the air. Thomas freezes, fingers tightening around the bucket's rough handle. He knows what the man wants. A crumb of truth, a slip of the tongue, something to spin into a tale that will flutter through the halls like a moth setting drapes alight. But Thomas only ducks his head, muttering about the embers going cold and the laundry piling up by the hour. He sidesteps the courtier's grasping hand, footsteps echoing too loudly down the corridor. His heart drums at his ribs. A warning, a promise that the walls have ears, and some of those ears sharpen like blades when a servant boy knows too much. In the hush of the servants' quarters that night, Thomas lies awake on his straw mattress, watching the rafters flicker with the dance of a stub of candle. He wonders if the king knows, if Henry realizes how much drifts under the door and settles like dust in the corners of a boy's mind. Does he understand that power, real power, is never truly hidden by silk or lace? It leaks, seeps, curls around the ankles of those who sweep the floors and tend the fires. Sometimes, Thomas thinks he should run. Leave this place of secrets and echoes. Take the cracked leather boots that blister his heels and walk until the walls are nothing but a dream. But then he remembers the look in the king's eyes when he thinks no one is watching. That soft flicker of a man half unmade, wrapped in silk that lets him breathe like he cannot in iron. And so Thomas stays. He piles the logs in the hearth, brushes the ashes from the hem of the gown left draped carelessly across a carved chair. He says nothing when the queen's favorite rosewater bottle appears empty sooner than it should. He listens at the door when the wind howls through the castle's stones, carrying whispers of secrets older than any crown. So tonight, if you ever wonder how stories survive in the cracks between history's grand pages, remember Thomas. Remember the servant boy with splinters in his palms and candle wax behind his ears. The boy who knows too much but speaks too little. The one who keeps the king's silk safe, tucked away like a prayer in the quiet folds of his mind. And maybe as you drift towards sleep, you'll feel that weight lift from your own shoulders too. The knowledge that sometimes the people who know our softest parts hold them the most gently, even if the world will never carve their names into stone. Rest easy now. The logs crackle in the hearth. The door stays shut, and the servant boy slips down the corridor once more, secrets trailing behind him like the soft rustle of silk in the dark. Next, settle deeper under your blanket, because this part drifts heavy as iron, yet soft as silk, a secret hidden in plain sight. It's easy to imagine a crown as a simple circle of gold, pretty and gleaming on a pillow of red velvet. A delicate thing, almost harmless. But that's the story you tell children, isn't it? The truth is a crown weighs more than any suit of armor ever forged. Picture Henry alone again, not wrapped in silk this time, but in the crushing press of daylight. He stands in the grand solar, windows thrown wide to let in a pale spill of sun that does nothing to warm the draft that creeps along the floor. A scribe kneels at his feet, parchment spread across a low table, quill scratching a list of grievances that never seems to end. The crown sits heavy on Henry's head, pressing into the thin skin at his temples, leaving a red groove that will ache long after the thing is set aside. It pinches just behind the ears a little too tight. The gold rim doesn't care if a king's head throbs with the weight of worry. It cares only that it shines. Every nod he gives, every tilt of his chin, sends a fresh needle of pain along his skull. He shifts his feet, but there's no escaping it. The crown reminds him with every heartbeat, you chose this. Or did it choose you? Around him, the solar hums with the drone of anxious men. A steward shuffles forward with accounts for grain stores that never stretch far enough. A knight argues about the training of new squires. Somewhere by the door, two scribes whisper, eyes flicking to the window where the town's rooftops huddle like nervous geese waiting for the next storm. Henry tries to listen. He tries to hold their questions and their demands in his mind all at once. To be father, judge, lord, savior, tyrant. He tries to remember the name of the widow who lost her husband in his last pointless skirmish. He tries not to think about the boy who'll be sent away tomorrow to hold a crumbling outpost with a sword too heavy for his young hands. The crown presses tighter the longer he stands there. He swears sometimes he can feel it squeezing the thoughts right out of his skull, pressing every soft thing down into silence, so only orders and decrees remain. Now, imagine the moment when the day finally bends its knee to dusk. The scribes scuttle off. The steward bows low and pulls the heavy door shut behind him. The solar empties out, but the crown stays, welded to his head by duty and the 1,000 unseen eyes that still watch from beyond the castle walls. Henry lifts trembling fingers to the cool band of gold. He wants to fling it across the room, let it clatter onto the rushes and roll into a dark corner where even the shadows won't find it. But he doesn't. He never does. He eases it off instead, careful not to catch his hair, careful not to leave a smear of sweat along the engraved rim. When the crown finally rests on the table, he rubs at the raw line it leaves behind. His head feels lighter, but his shoulders do not. The armor may be gone, the chainmail laid aside, the cloak unfastened, but the weight lingers, invisible and relentless. And this is when the silk calls to him, a whisper in the corner of his mind. He steps across the room to the chest at the foot of his bed, flips back the lid. A gown, soft as dusk itself, pools in his palms when he lifts it free. He breathes in the faint scent, lavender and the ghost of rosewater. Maybe just wishful thinking, but enough to soothe the ache behind his eyes. He slips it over his head, lets it settle around his shoulders like the gentlest of shields. It's absurd, he knows. Silk won't stop an arrow, won't turn a blade. But tonight, it does something chainmail never can. It lets him remember he is flesh before he is iron, bone before he is crown. Picture him now, standing before the tall, narrow window. The crown sits forgotten on the table behind him, gleaming dully in the last rays of the sinking sun. He raises a hand, fingers brushing the glass pane. His reflection looks back, the silk gown catching the dying light, the raw line across his brow fading into shadows. A man who, for this one small moment, belongs to no one but himself. Outside, the town stirs with the soft murmur of the coming night. A blacksmith's hammer falling for the final time, a dog barking at a passing stranger, a child's lullaby drifting through a shuttered window. All of it floats up to the king's chamber like a reminder that the world does not spin only because he wears that crown. In this hush, the gown weighs nothing, and that, perhaps, is the truest kind of armor a man like Henry can ever find. So, as you settle deeper into your pillow tonight, remember this. Not all burdens clang like iron. Some sit quiet on your brow, pressing harder the longer you pretend they are light. And sometimes it takes the softest thing, a slip of silk, a stolen scent, a gown that once belonged to another, to lift that weight for just a moment. Close your eyes, feel that crown lift off your own thoughts, just for now. Let it rest on the table while you drift further into the hush, the dark, the gentle places where no one demands you be anything but warm and real. And tomorrow? Well, the crown can wait for tomorrow. Next, imagine that, for all the burdens pressed down by the iron crown, all the secret silk moments that slip through locked doors at midnight, there is yet another secret so soft and strange that even the gossiping courtiers daren't whisper it too loud. The king does not bear this hidden world alone. Picture the chamber when everyone thinks it is empty but for Henry, and the hush that falls when the great castle finally gives up its last sighs of wakefulness. The candles burn low, tiny trembling flames that cast shadows long enough to swallow all the day's harsh edges. The fire pops once, sending up a ghostly drift of sparks that fade before they ever touch the tapestries lining the walls. In the flicker of that half-light, there is a figure, someone who slips through the hush like a memory made flesh. A knight, perhaps, or a court favorite who rose higher than any birthright should allow. His name does not matter to the history books. They would never record it faithfully anyway. Let's call him Elias for tonight. A man with strong hands, a mouth quick to smile, and eyes that see past silk and crowns alike. He leans against the door, boots shedding mud onto the rushes, shoulders wrapped in a simple cloak that smells of saddle leather and the cold bite of the stables. He waits, always waits, until Henry lifts his head from the heavy thoughts pressing it down, and a smile breaks like dawn behind the mask of the king. No words pass at first. The hush does not need them. Elias moves forward, steps soft as a cat, and kneels to unfasten the king's boots, rolling silk over skin that has known the bite of steel for too many years. He lets his fingertips linger at the king's ankles, just long enough to remind them both that here, in this narrow slice of time, no iron can wedge its way between them. Picture this. The silk gown that once seemed secret now drapes openly across Henry's shoulders as he shifts, knees brushing Elias's thigh. It pools on the floor like a spill of moonlight, trailing in folds that catch the shadows as they breathe around them. They do not hurry. What need is there for haste when the world beyond the thick stone walls cannot touch them here? 1,000 candle stubs could burn out before either man cares if the sun comes clawing at the shutters. They talk sometimes, low murmurs half lost to the crackle of the fire. Stories of childhood, dreams never spoken in the council chamber. Hopes that slip between the letters of royal decrees. And jokes, soft, sly things that make Henry laugh in a voice no soldier has ever heard. Elias leans close, breath warm against the king's ear, and the silk slides aside just enough for fingers to trace the dip of his collarbone. It is a strange kind of power, this thing they hold between them. A bargain no scribe will ever ink, a rule they write with bare skin and heartbeat alone. There are no scrolls for it to live on, no laws to bind it, no courtiers brave enough to name it. But it is real. Perhaps the realest thing Henry knows. Outside the chamber, the wind claws at the window casements. Rain taps like a nosy courtier begging to peek inside. The guards stomp their feet at the gate, trying to keep the creeping chill from gnawing at their bones. But in here, the hush holds them safe. Warm, softened. Imagine Elias drawing back the silk so he can see the red line the crown left behind. That raw groove pressed into Henry's skin. He kisses it slow, deliberate, as if he could smooth it away with nothing but the heat of his breath. He traces the curve of Henry's jaw, studies the face that everyone else must meet with bowed heads and quivering knees. No bowing now, no kneeling but for the sake of closeness. They are equals here, not king and knight, not ruler and subject, but something older than titles, older than the walls that try to keep them apart. And when they finally rest, tangled in silk and bare skin, their warmth seeping into the furs and the rushes beneath, the hush seems to breathe with them. The fire settles into glowing coals. The last candle sputters low, wick drowned in a pool of soft golden wax. Outside this chamber, the rumors wait, hungry, patient, ready to blossom on the lips of jealous courtiers. But here, their love is not rumor but truth, raw and secret and alive. A truth that needs no one's permission, no seal pressed into warm wax, no grand proclamation from the pulpit. So as you drift deeper now, think of them, the lovers who wrote their own rules, who found a kind of freedom not in iron or gold, but in the hush of silk and the press of two foreheads resting together in the dark. Let remind you that some rules are worth breaking, some crowns worth slipping off, and some whispers are too soft and precious to ever live anywhere but in the hush between two heartbeats. Rest there for a moment, in the hush where love does not care who watches, because tonight no one is watching but the flicker of the last dying flame. And maybe you, safe beneath your blankets, your heart warm with the knowledge that the softest secrets are sometimes the strongest things of all. Meanwhile, somewhere between the hush of stolen embraces and the chill that seeps into ancient stones, there's a moment when Henry slips away from silk and flesh alike. A moment when even Elias's warmth cannot quite silence the restless echoes that creep in after the laughter fades. Picture this. The castle sleeps, or tries to. The guards outside snore softly into their fur collars. The hounds in the yard curl tighter against the cold, and the candles gutter one by one in the grand hall until all that's left is a single flicker in the chapel, stubborn against the darkness that presses at the stained glass windows. It is here that Henry comes, barefoot, the hem of his gown whispering across the stone flags like a ghost that has forgotten how to haunt. The great iron-bound door creaks open at his touch. Not the grand entrance used for coronations or royal weddings, but a narrow side door, half hidden by a tapestry of some stiff old saint whose eyes follow every trespasser like a hawk. Inside, the chapel is smaller than the cathedral out in the courtyard, but older, built before the kingdom was really a kingdom, when the stone masons still carved pagan faces into the corners just to keep the old spirits sweet. It smells of beeswax and damp. The cold scent of rain slipping through mortar cracks no one dares repair too perfectly, lest they anger whatever ancient breath still lives there. A single candle burns on the altar, short and stubby, set in a tarnished holder battered by decades of priests who scolded the king for never coming here by daylight. But Henry doesn't want daylight prayers tonight. He wants the dark ones, the ones not found in any psalter or etched in Latin above the door. He drops to his knees on the cold stone, silk pooling around him like a private tide. His breath fogs before him as he leans forward, pressing his fingertips to the edge of the altar. A slab of stone so old its corners have worn smooth under the hands of men who beg for things they'd never dare speak aloud in the court. Picture him there, a king stripped of armor, crownless, barefoot, the delicate scent of rose water clinging to his throat like a memory. His lips move, but the words are not the stiff prayers the bishop insists must be spoken in Latin. No, these are older, ragged half-syllables his nursemaid once murmured over him when he was too fevered to sleep, when the kingdom was just a room with a cracked window and a soft voice in the dark. He calls on gods whose names were buried under cathedral stones centuries ago, gods with antlers and soft doe eyes, gods with bronze bracelets that clink like secrets and cloaks that rustle like fields of wheat in the wind. Gods who do not care if he wears silk or iron, who do not demand the right signature on a decree before they bless him with sleep. He presses his forehead to the altar. The stone is cold enough to burn. He does not flinch. He wants to feel the bite of it, wants the numbness that creeps up through his knees and into the bones that ache from a crown that never really leaves, even when it's set aside. Somewhere in the rafters, a bird stirs, a pigeon who has found its way in through a broken slat. Its wings flutter once, echoing like a soft reprimand. He laughs under his breath, a bitter, breathy sound that rattles in the empty space. Even the birds pray here, old gods, he thinks. So hear me too. What does he pray for? Not victory, not gold, not even loyalty. No, tonight he prays for something so small it feels treasonous to say aloud. To be seen, truly seen, by something bigger than duty. To be forgiven for the soft places inside him that silk cannot hide and iron cannot protect. To find rest that does not vanish with the sunrise. He stays like that for as long as his knees can bear it. The candle burns lower, the wax pooling like a tiny lake around the battered holder. Somewhere behind him, the wind sighs through the narrow windows, humming an old tune no monk ever dared transcribe. When he lifts his head, his skin is raw where the stone kissed it. He does not wipe it away. The mark feels holy somehow, a sign that the old gods, indifferent and wild, press their fingers there before they slip back into whatever dream they keep behind the walls of the world. He pushes himself up, joints stiff, legs tingling as blood returns to places that forgot they were alive. He does not turn his back on the altar as he leaves. Old habits, old respect for spirits that never cared about cathedrals but always demanded to be met eye to eye. Back in the corridor, he pulls the silk tighter around him, the chill clinging like a reminder that the world beyond the chapel door is still waiting, hungry and sharp. But for a heartbeat, just one, the weight on his shoulders feels lighter than the crown could ever manage. So tonight, as you drift into your own hush, think of him there, a king in silk, kneeling on cold stone, whispering to gods whose names your bones remember even if your lips do not. Let remind you that sometimes The oldest prayers are not for power, but for the softness we lose when the world demands too much iron from us. Close your eyes now. Let the old gods keep watch over your dreams. And if you wake with a mark on your forehead that feels like the cool kiss of stone, you'll know you've been heard too, somewhere in that hush where silk and crown fall away and only your truest self remains. Next, imagine the night pressing its cold face against the castle walls. Beyond the ramparts, the countryside lies black and vast, stitched with tiny specks of torchlight, campfires for merchants too late on the road, or soldiers who do not yet know whether they are friend or foe by dawn's first gray breath. Inside the castle, the wind rattles shutters, test the strength of every window latch. The guards shift at their posts, stamping their boots to chase away the numbness that crawls up their legs like an uninvited guest. There's the taste of fear in the air, iron-rich and bitter, like blood you bite from your own lip when you've spoken a truth too sharp. They say enemies lurk just beyond the next hill, a band of rebels, perhaps, or a rival noble family that's decided winter is the perfect season to unsettle a king. Some claim it's foreign mercenaries, paid in gold coins that clink like rattlesnakes in the dark. But who can tell rumor from fact when rumor itself is sharper than any dagger? And yet, in the heart of this stone labyrinth, behind walls thick enough to swallow an army's roar, the real danger does not clang swords or test the strength of gates. No, it seeps under doors like candle smoke. It curls into bedchambers on soft velvet paws. It whispers through corridors by way of restless lips, servants' stray glances, letters tucked inside boots before they're smuggled into the night. Picture Henry at his window, the silk gown pulled around him, the crown nowhere in sight, but its ghost pressing cold at the base of his skull. He stares through the narrow gap in the shutters, sees nothing but the restless flicker of torches on the outer wall. He imagines the unseen shapes beyond the light, blades glinting, eyes watching, hands restless on bowstrings. The courtiers tell him he must appear strong. That softness is a crack in the castle wall, an open gate begging for a siege. They tell him his silks are dangerous, not because they weaken him, but because they confuse the enemy. And what people cannot understand, they fear. And what they fear, they will try to destroy. But what the courtiers never say, what they pretend not to know, is that the true enemies sleep inside these walls. Some share his wine, toast his health with sly smiles that hide hunger sharp enough to peel flesh from bone. Some lean too close in council meetings, their voices honey-sweet, while their hands sketch plans for the day. They slip a dagger between his ribs, or worse, into the tender hollow of trust that even a king keeps hidden. Imagine it. The king in his silk, the hush of the chamber wrapping him tight, and somewhere beyond that door, a whisper blooms like mold in the dark. Did you see him? The silk? The perfume? The night slipping out before dawn? Little spores that cling to the mind until they become a rot no decree can scrape away. Yet Henry does not tremble at the idea of armored rebels. Iron is simple, a blade, a shield, the heavy certainty of bone meeting steel. But words? Secrets? They slip past gates, swim through cracks, settle like seeds under the tongues of kitchen boys, grooms, scribes. By the time you hear your own name on a rumor's breath, it's too late. It's rooted so deep it might as well be truth. Still, here he stands, at the window, watching the dark press in. The silk sleeve drifts against his wrist, soft where the wind pricks his skin raw. He could shed it, put on iron instead, but what good is iron if your mind rots from inside the walls? Behind him, a dying fire hums in the hearth. Elias sleeps tangled in furs, breath slow and steady, a rare promise of loyalty that no army could ever buy. For a moment, Henry lets his fingers brush the edge of the window, icy cold against his knuckles. Let them come, he thinks, the traitors with their pretty words, the rebels with their iron. Let them test his walls and find them softer than they dreamed, soft like silk, impossible to tear. He turns away from the window, the wind hissing as he pulls the shutters tight. The firelight catches the edge of the gown, its hem trailing across the rushes like a banner no one dares carry into daylight. He moves through the room, the hush wrapping around him like a second skin, a shield better than iron. Because here is the thing the enemies at the gate and the ones inside will never understand. Secrets can wound, yes, but they can also protect. Silk can bind sharper than chains. And a king who wears both crown and gown is a man they cannot quite predict, cannot quite corner. So, as you lie in your own hush tonight, listening for winds that rattle your windows, remember this. The real siege is not always at the gates. It's in the corridor whispers, the careless glance, the rumors traded like coins in the dark. But inside every fortress, there is a chamber no enemy can breach. The place where you wrap yourself in your strangest, softest truth and dare the world to try and tear it away. Sleep there tonight, deep inside the hush, safe behind the walls that no sword, no rumor, no rebel army can ever truly storm. And if you hear footsteps outside your door, let the silk rustle softly in your mind, a reminder that the truest strength is the secret they'll never hold in their trembling hands. Next, let's drift into a corner of the castle where laughter is never just laughter, and a careless joke can tumble ahead faster than any sword. In every court worth its salt, there is a jester, that bright spark in a world heavy with iron and secrets. A fool, they call him, but only fools believe that's all he is. Picture him now. Ribbons on his cap, faded with the grease of too many fingers. Bells that jingle with a sound that's half joy, half warning. His name has been worn smooth by so many lips that no one remembers what he was called before he learned to make a king smile or flinch. He moves through the great hall like a flicker of flame in a drafty corridor, weaving between nobles who pretend not to hear him until his words prick just enough to draw a flush to the cheeks. Laughter follows him like a dog on a fraying leash, never quite tame, always one slip away from snarling. And tonight, of all nights, he plays a dangerous game. Because tonight, the rumor of silk and rosewater and a king's bare feet on cold stone has already begun to drift among the torches and tapestries. Tongues wag in dark corners, but they do not dare wag too loud. That's where the jester comes in. He says what the rest only dare to think. He is the pressure valve for the whisper that could crack the crown in two. Picture the feast half-eaten, goblets warm in sweaty palms. The king reclines at the high table, gown hidden beneath a fur-lined robe, but everyone knows. They've seen the flash of satin at his wrist, the glint of a delicate chain peeking from beneath the stiff collar. They know, but they pretend. And the jester? He pretends not to pretend. He dances forward on slippered feet, a painted grin stretched across a face that is older than it first appears in the candlelight. He jingles his bells like a warning. He carries a wooden scepter carved to look like a mirror, a cruel joke in itself. "My lord," he cries, bowing so low his nose nearly brushes the rushes on the floor. "A toast, if it please your majesty, and even if it does not." The courtiers freeze, forks hovering halfway to lips, wine halfway to tongues that burn to laugh but fear to snarl. Henry lifts one brow, a kingdom of judgment in a single raised line. The hush is sharp enough to cut. The jester spins the scepter in his fingers, around and around, mirror catching the torchlight, sending shards of reflection skipping across velvet and gold. To the king who wears a crown by day and softer treasures by night, He trills, voice lilting high and low, each word carefully balanced on the razor edge of jest and truth. May the silk keep him warm when iron would only chafe. A gasp, then a ripple of forced chuckles, nervous and thin as parchment. A noble lady covers her mouth, eyes darting to the king. A page nearly chokes on his wine. And Henry? He does not flinch. Not yet. He tilts his head, and in the shadows of that small movement is a promise no one wants to test. The jester sees it. Of course he does. He's lived on the edge of that blade since he first stepped into the great hall with bells on his hat and a secret prayer under his tongue. Let me speak the truth, but not so loud that I cannot live to joke again tomorrow. He prances closer, dropping to one knee before the dais, head bowed low so the bells dangle and shiver like trapped fireflies. Forgive my fool's tongue, your majesty, he purrs. But isn't it better to wear silk by choice than iron by demand? A hush thicker than the stone walls. The guards at the door stiffen, boots scraping the floor. Somewhere, a fire crackles in the hearth, a single pop like a snap bone. Then, the king laughs. Not a great booming roar, but a soft, unexpected sound, like a candle flame catching on a stubborn wick. The jester feels the tension drain just enough for the room to exhale, for the courtiers to trade shaky smiles, for the page to breathe again. Henry leans forward, eyes glinting like steel beneath the flicker of candlelight. You know, fool, he says, voice gentle as silk sliding off a shoulder. Sometimes you remind me of the chain I cannot see but always feel. The jester dares a grin, teeth bright in the half-dark. Then let me be a chain that does not pinch, my liege. A chain that rattles so the iron stays quiet. And just like that, the laughter returns. Uncertain at first, but growing, swelling to fill the shadows that threaten to choke it. Goblets clink, knives scrape plates. The danger passes, tonight at least. But when the hall empties and the jester slips away to his tiny chamber above the kitchens, a room barely wide enough for the length of his body curled around his jokes, he feels the tremor in his fingertips. He knows one day the chain will snap. One jest too sharp, one truth too raw, one laugh that cuts instead of soothes. He lies awake on his straw mattress, bells unstrapped from his hat, listening to the hum of the castle's secrets crawling through the beams overhead. He wonders if he will be remembered as the fool who danced too close to the king's silk and the court's iron, or if, like all good jesters, his name will slip away in the dark, just another echo swallowed by stone. So tonight, as you drift deeper into your hush, think of him, the jester who wears a painted smile to hide the quiver in his breath, who dares to say aloud what the rest bury under embroidered collars and sealed letters. The fool who knows that sometimes truth is safest when wrapped in bells and laughter that hides the blade it carries. And maybe, if you dream of him, you'll hear the soft jingle of his cap and remember, not every chain clangs. Some rattle like a song in the dark, warning you that the sharpest jest is always a heartbeat away from silence. Now, picture this. The stone castle walls hold 1,000 stories of wedding nights. Some were so grand the candles burned until dawn, dripping rivers of wax down golden candelabras. Others were hushed affairs, cold and awkward, two strangers fumbling under velvet covers, bound not by longing, but by treaties inked by trembling scribes. But tonight is not the kind of wedding night the scribes would know how to record. If they did, they'd scratch out the words before the ink could dry, afraid the parchment itself might blush. Imagine the king's chamber, not the echoing hall where a bride is paraded before noble eyes and pious mouths mumble blessings no one listens to. No, this chamber is smaller, warmer. A fire snaps behind an ornate screen, throwing shadows that dance across the fur rugs and silk pillows scattered like spilled petals. The scent of lavender oil drifts through the air, clinging to the rushes underfoot and the thick velvet curtains drawn tight to hold the hush inside. Henry waits there, but not alone. Beside him sits the queen, or at least the woman they call the queen when the sun stands high and the courtiers bow, so low they nearly kiss the flagstones. She is more than her crown tonight, more than silk stitched with jewels, more than a smile painted on for the sake of foreign envoys. She's there, hair unpinned, curls falling in soft waves that brush the slope of her bare shoulder. She watches him with an expression that no herald would dare describe, a look that sees the king, the man, the boy who once pressed wildflowers in her palm when no one was watching. And he is half draped in the same silk gown that once belonged to her, the hem trailing across the furs as if it remembers every footstep she ever took in it. Around his neck, a slender chain that once nestled against the curve of her collarbone now rests above the steady thrum of his pulse. They speak little. Words feel too blunt for this hush. Instead, they move closer, a touch here, a brush of knuckles there. His fingers gather the hem of her shift, soft linen bunching as he pulls her near enough to feel her warmth slip through the thin layer of silk. Picture how they trade places in that flickering light, how she slips her arms through the sleeves of his gown, pulling it around herself until the fabric swallows the scent of rosewater that clings to him. She tilts her head back, lets him thread her hair through his fingers like a handful of spun gold. They laugh, but not loudly. A soft, surprised laugh, like a bell muffled in snow. Imagine it, two monarchs wrapped in each other's borrowed skins, writing new vows with each sigh. There are no witnesses but the shadows that watch from the rafters, no record but the way their breath fogs the glass panes behind them. This is not a night for duty, not for heirs or alliances or the ghost of fathers whispering reminders that the kingdom must come first. Tonight, they are rebels, small, secret rebels who claim the hush as their right. The silk slips from his shoulder, slides from hers, pools like water at their feet. For a moment, you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. When the fire burns low, they do not rush to pull their crowns back on. They lie tangled in the furs, limbs woven together like ivy twining through old stone. His fingers trace the hollow of her throat, feeling the steady beat that answers his own. And in that hush, he tells her a secret, one so small it feels like it might slip from his tongue and vanish if spoken in daylight. He tells her that the silk does not make him less, that the softness does not weaken the iron beneath, that she, with her laughter hidden behind a stiff collar, understands that truth better than any chancellor who rattles off treaties in the cold echo of the council chamber. She tells him her secret, too, that when she wore the crown for the first time, it felt less like glory and more like a chain she never asked to bear. That she, too, sometimes slips into the hush of old rituals, dreams of wild flowers and gods who never cared if you wore fur or silk. And so they lie there, the king and the queen, their secrets pressing warm into the hush. Outside, the castle sleeps, guards pacing the walls, the distant hills alive with rumors of restless enemies who have never once imagined that the heart of the kingdom is not stone or iron or the weight of an ancient crown. It's this, a silk gown traded back and forth, a whisper of laughter that no scribe will ever set down. A wedding night rewritten not for the scribes, but for themselves. So as you drift closer to sleep, pull the hush around you like that borrowed gown. Let it remind you that not every promise needs witnesses. Not every vow needs ink. Some nights are meant to be rewritten, soft, secret pages pressed together by nothing more than the weight of two warm bodies in the dark. And tomorrow, let the courtiers guess at the truth all they want. Tonight, it belongs only to those who dare to rewrite the story when the doors are locked and the candles burn low. Next, imagine the hush that settles when a stranger steps through the gates of a kingdom that pretends to have no secrets. The castle wakes early on days like these, long before the sun has shaken off its gray blanket of mist. Servants scrub the flagstones until they shine like old coins. Cooks sweat over roasts and sugared fruits that no one will touch, but everyone will praise. Courtiers rehearse their best bows, lips twitching around polite phrases they must remember to forget as soon as the last carriage will clatters back down the road. A foreign envoy has arrived. An ambassador, an observer, an opportunist in furs dyed deeper than any native cloth. His boots click too sharply on the floor. His ringed fingers drum a rhythm that sounds like a threat hidden in a lullaby. He has come to measure the king with his own eyes, to weigh the silk whispers against the iron promises inked on brittle parchment. Picture the hall that morning. Cold sun sliding through narrow windows, banners drooping in the stale air. The envoy stands stiff by the hearth, one hand resting on the pommel of a ceremonial dagger, so ornate it would snap at the first real clash of steel. He watches the nobles gather, the usual nods and murmured greetings, the careful way they do not look at one another too long. And then, the hush, the collective breath sucked in when Henry appears. Not in the stiff brocade doublet the court tailors sigh over for hours, nor in the thick fur-lined cloak that makes him look broader than any man should have to be. No, today, because the hush demands it, Henry chooses the silk. Not the gauzy nightgowns he wears when only shadows witness him. Not quite the Queen's violet robe, either. This is something new, stitched by hands that know exactly how to balance scandal and spectacle. A flowing tunic of deep sapphire, sleeves wide enough that they drape past his wrists like trailing water. At his throat, a single chain glints, too fine for a warrior, too bold for a monk, too perfect for a king who dares to be both. Imagine the envoy's eyes, how they flicker, how they tighten at the corners as he bows, just deeply enough to hide the glimmer of surprise. He had been warned, of course. Whispers travel faster than horses. But rumor is a pale ghost next to the warm, solid sight of a king who stands draped in softness and meets your gaze with the kind of calm that cracks spears in half. The courtiers hold their breath. Their eyes scuttle between the envoy and their monarch, each one calculating how deeply they should bow, how far they must sink to prove they too stand firm behind this strange, soft strength. Henry smiles, a soft thing, polite and unreadable as fresh snow. He lifts a goblet, not too high, not too low. He gestures to the envoy to drink first, a silent reminder that here, within these walls, the hush writes its own etiquette. The envoy raises his cup, lips pressed tight. He tries not to stare at the silk, but he can't help it. The way it pools around the king's waist, the way the hem brushes the polished flagstones with each subtle shift of his weight. He wonders, just for a heartbeat, if the gown is lined with chainmail, if somewhere beneath all that softness lurks a blade poised to slit the throat of any who mistakes silk for surrender. A steward steps forward, voice thin and slippery as the steam rising from the platters of roasted goose and honeyed pears. He recites titles and welcomes, words that bounce off the old stone like pebbles flicked at a fortress wall. The envoy nods at the appropriate moments. He smiles when expected, but in his eyes, you can see the questions blooming like thorns. Why does a king who rules with iron wear silk before his enemies? Why does a man who commands battalions drape himself in softness that mocks the chainmail waiting in the armory? Does he flaunt it as an insult or as a warning? And Henry? He sits back, fingers tracing the rim of his goblet. He catches the envoy's stare, lets it linger a heartbeat too long. He does not flinch. He does not tug the silk tighter, does not hide the pale skin at his throat or the line at his wrist where a ring of gold once left its mark. Instead, he leans in, just a fraction, enough that the envoy feels the hush wrap around him like a cold breath on the back of the neck. "Tell your lord this," he murmurs, voice low and calm as a velvet rope pulled taut. "Tell him silk does not soften iron. It wraps it, confuses it, makes it harder to grasp." The envoy forces a laugh, the sound thin and brittle as spun sugar. He says something about trade, about friendship, about winter caravans that will carry spices and rumors in equal measure. But the hush has already swallowed his polite chatter. The only sound that matters is the soft rustle of silk as Henry shifts, folds one leg over the other, and watches his guest with eyes that promise there is no corner of this stone maze he does not own, no rumor so sharp that it cannot be dulled by the hush. Later, when the envoy leaves, boots muddy from the courtyard, lips dry with unasked questions, the rumor will travel ahead of him. It will slip under stable doors, curl into the dreams of guards who pretend not to gossip. The king wears silk to mock them. The king wears silk to invite them. The king wears silk to remind them that a blade wrapped in satin cuts just as deep. And so tonight, as you lie there with your blanket tucked tight under your chin, let the hush hold you close. Think of Henry, the king who wears his softness like a blade and lets the world wonder where the edge truly lies. Let it remind you that sometimes what confuses your enemies protects you better than the sharpest armor. Sleep easy. Let them raise their eyebrows in distant courts. Let them scribble worried letters and chase phantoms in silk sleeves. You know the truth. Softness is not surrender. It's just the cloak you wear when the world would rather see you hardened to stone. And you, like Henry, are no stone tonight. You're silk, and a hush keeps you safe. Next, lean closer now, because this part lives not in the hush of silk or the echo of rumors, but in the stitches that crawl across the high stone walls. Stories sewn by hands long gone. Stories that do not care who claims the throne when the sun comes up. Picture the great hall, vast enough that footsteps vanish before they reach the far wall, wide enough that even the wind must circle twice before it finds the crack beneath the heavy door. Along these walls hang the tapestries, grand, dusty chronicles of a kingdom that pretends its history is neat, noble, and proud. At first glance, they're exactly what you'd expect. Scenes of kings astride war horses, bright banners snapping above battlefields painted in 1,000 knots of red and gold thread. Queens stand frozen mid-curtsy, delicate fingers grazing the folds of gowns that took a season to stitch. Saints hover overhead, eyes rolled toward heaven, fingers raised in blessing. But move closer, really look. The old threads whisper things the scribes never dared to write down. They tell a different story for those who know where to place their candlelight. Imagine Henry on a sleepless night, silk pooling around his legs as he stands barefoot on the cold floor, head tipped back to study the figures that sprawl above him. He knows every face by now. The king who waged war against the north, the queen who gave birth to 12 children, 10 of whom died before they learned to hold a spoon. He knows where the moths have nibbled holes through the hem of a hero's embroidered cloak, how the colors fade from scarlet to the soft brown of old blood. But his favorite part is not the battles. It is the margins, those soft, ignored edges where the seamstresses stitched secrets so small the priests never saw them. There, at the border where flowers tangle into vines, you might catch the faint shape of a figure not quite made. A man with a crown stitched above his head, but robes that flow like a lady's train. A sly smile pulled tight by a single twist of golden thread. No banner proclaims his name. No legend in Latin explains why this crowned figure drifts among the rabbits and foxes, stitched into the border like an afterthought. But Henry knows. He imagines the needle pricking calloused fingertips in the hush of some windowless chamber. A young girl stitching under candlelight, tongue caught between her teeth as she slips in the truth her masters would have ordered ripped out if they'd ever bothered to look that close. The truth that once, maybe more than once, kings were not what the scrolls say they were. They were softer, stranger, draped in gowns and garlands, crowned and barefoot at the same time, dancing between saints and devils with a smile that said, "Try to pin me down, I dare you." Sometimes Henry presses his palm to the wall, tracing the shape with his fingertips. He imagines the warmth left by those invisible hands that push the needle through, tugged the thread tight, and left behind a secret no blade could cut free. When the scribes wrote their chronicles, they left no room for these border things. Too messy, too human, too dangerous, perhaps, to admit that power does not always stand rigid in iron and fur, shouting down from horseback. Sometimes it drifts like silk through a tapestry's edge, grinning where no one expects to find it. Now picture the courtiers. They stand there too, sometimes stiff as fence posts in their layered finery, noses lifted so high they'd miss a dagger underfoot. They see the big scenes, the coronation, the battles, the saintly queen wiping blood from a knight's brow. But they do not see the crowned figure hidden among the flowers. They do not hear what the old threads murmur when the hall grows quiet and the fire burns low. And perhaps that is why Henry smiles when he wears his silk in plain sight. He knows that the truth is not on the throne, or the parchment, or the prayers that scratch at the ceiling of the royal chapel. It is here along the edges, sewn into the border by hands that dared to leave something real behind. So when the enemies gather at the gate, when the scribes sharpen their quills to scratch his name into a neat column of history, when the world demands to know why a king would slip into a gown and perfume his wrists with rose water, he simply tilts his head back and looks at the tapestry. The crowned figure grins down at him, forever caught in that dance of silk and crown and bare feet on soft moss. The foxes curl around its ankles. The rabbits nibble at its hem. And the flowers bloom, unwilted by time, like a promise stitched into the stones themselves. Power is not what they say it is. It never was. So tonight, as you lie warm in your bed, think of those hidden stitches. The border stories that survive when the parchment burns and the scribes lie cold in the earth. Remember that your softest truths, the ones you keep at the edges where no one thinks to look, might be the strongest threads you'll ever leave behind. Close your eyes. Let the hush settle over you like the gentle weight of old embroidery. Sleep easy, knowing that what you tuck into your borders, your secret softness, your silk moments, will outlast any crown pressed hard to your brow. Some truths, once stitched, never come undone. Next, come with me beyond the tapestries and the cold stone walls, out past the heavy doors that creak like old bones whenever they open after dark. The hush lives out there too, wrapped around hedges and tangled vines that grow where no one dares look too closely. Because sometimes even a king, wrapped in silk and rumor, must slip outside the cage, no matter how gilded its bars. Picture this. The castle gardens at midnight, not the manicured terraces they show off to visiting envoys, with topiaries clipped into the shapes of lions and griffins to prove that power can tame even the wildest branch. No, further out, where the lanterns burn out too quickly and the gardeners pretend not to notice the weeds that push up through the gravel paths. Here, The roses climb where they please, their petals soft as secrets, their thorns sharp enough to remind you that beauty never blooms without a price. The fountains gurgle in the dark, moss creeping over carved stone nymphs who smirk at the moon. The air smells of wet earth, the sweetness of crushed herbs underfoot, and the faint bite of frost that creeps in before dawn. Imagine Henry, slippered feet crunching on the path as he slips away from the warmth of the hearth and the eyes that cling too tightly in the corridors. The silk gown trails behind him, its hem dragging through damp grass, gathering the garden's hush like a net scoops up fish in a still pond. He does not take a lantern. Light would ruin the soft dark, the way the shadows gather in pools beneath the twisted branches. Instead, the moon guides him, pale and watchful, slipping silver across his bare throat, catching on the tiny chain that rests just below his collarbone. He breathes deep, the cold biting at the raw, mark the crown left behind hours ago. Sometimes he pauses at the low stone wall that circles the orchard. He lets his fingers trail over the rough moss, remembers being a boy small enough to hide beneath the trees, bruising apples in his pockets to take back to his nursemaid. Back then, the garden was freedom, a place where no one cared if his shoes were scuffed or his knees green from grass. He feels that same hush now, older but unchanged. Picture him pushing deeper to where the hedges grow so wild they form a maze. It's said that no king should walk a maze alone. Too easy to vanish, to lose yourself in the turning paths until dawn finds your bones cold against the damp earth. But that is precisely the point. To be lost here is to be free of the corridors, the council chamber, the chain of iron words and polished lies. There's a bench, half swallowed by ivy, tucked in the heart of the maze. He finds it by memory, settling into its rough stone seat, silk pooling around him like moonlight gathered in a cup. The hush presses in, thicker than the tapestries, softer than any crown's cold weight. He closes his eyes, listens to the drip of a fountain somewhere deeper in the shadows, to the wind pulling the leaves into secret conversations, to the echo of his own breath. Quiet now, unburdened by titles. Sometimes, if you stood close enough, if you dared, you might hear him whisper to the roses that brush his shoulder. Words that make no sense in the council chamber, but fit here, among petals that do not judge and thorns that guard their softness fiercely. Little prayers to old gods. A half laugh at the jester's last joke. A vow to himself that he will remember the silk moments when iron calls his name again at dawn. And there, in that hush, you can almost see him as the boy he once was. Before the crown fit too tight. Before the enemies gathered at the gate and the courtiers learned to speak with poisoned tongues. Just Henry, barefoot in the damp grass, breath misting in the moonlight, silk brushing his ankles like the ghost of a bedtime story no one ever wrote down. When he finally rises, the hem of the gown is damp, green with crushed mint and fallen petals that cling like tiny confessions. He brushes them away but keeps one small bloom pressed in his palm. A pale rose, its stem bent, its scent sharp and alive. A reminder that softness is sometimes best found in the places no one thinks to look. A forgotten bench, a garden overgrown, a path that twists until it leads you back to yourself. So tonight, as you lie in your own hush, let your mind wander out through your walls. Step barefoot into your garden, real or imagined, and let the wind braid secrets through your hair. Let the scent of wild roses remind you that even the softest things can guard you better than any fortress. And if you dream of silk trailing through the maze, know that you, too, can slip away when the world presses too close. Breathe. Let the hush hold you. The garden waits. Next, Imagine the hush that lingers not in whispers or footsteps, but in ink, thick, dark, and heavy with words that might never see the light of day. Because for all the rumors that cling to stone corridors and slip beneath oak doors, some truths are so soft, so dangerous, that they must be trapped between folded parchment, hidden in a drawer no one dares unlock. Picture Henry at a small desk in his private chamber, long after the last candle has guttered out in the council hall. A single flame flickers here, a stub of tallow with wax pooling down the side, forming a slow-growing mountain that drips onto the ink-stained wood below. The night breathes around him, cold and restless, tapping at the window with a soft hush of rain that no guard can keep out. The silk gown pulls around his arms as he leans forward, the edge of the sleeve blotched black where it brushed the inkwell hours ago. The quill trembles between his fingers, not because the room is drafty, though it is, but because some words are heavier than a crown and softer too. There's a stack of parchment to his left, some sheets blank, others scrawled with lines so crossed out they look like thorns. He's tried to shape the words 100 ways. Commands, confessions, apologies, prayers. Each attempt scratches a piece of him raw and leaves the page looking more haunted than before. Tonight's letter starts differently. He writes not as a king, but as a man who is tired of iron and hungry for something he cannot name in daylight. He writes to no one, and yet to everyone. The parchment holds the weight of secrets no rumor can carry, because rumors need ears, and this hush needs none. Picture it. To the one who will never read this, he begins, the quill scratching softly, the ink pooling dark and glistening like a bruise under a lantern's glow. I wonder if you know what it is to wear the iron crown and dream only of silk. To taste the honeyed words of loyalty while you swallow the bitterness they hide. To love the hush more than the roar, and fear what the hush might reveal. His hand trembles when he writes of the garden, the wild maze where rose petals cling to his hem like confessions. He writes of Elias, the press of his breath at Henry's collarbone, the warmth that holds the rumors at bay, if only for a night. He writes of the jester's laugh, sharp and soft all at once, a reminder that truth can slip from the lips of fools when wise men keep their teeth clenched shut. He does not sign it as Henry Rex. He does not seal it with the royal crest. He signs it simply H, the single letter that feels light enough to carry this softness without cracking under it. Sometimes he folds these letters, crisp corners, edges lined up like ranks of soldiers who will never see battle. Sometimes he tears them apart, lets the scraps flutter into the hearth where the hush eats them up in tiny puffs of smoke. But tonight, he leaves this one intact. He tucks it beneath a book of old poems, one his mother read to him before he learned that crowns come with blades hidden in the curve of every compliment. Imagine a servant finding that letter one day, long after the silk has turned to dust and the crown sits crooked on another man's head. Maybe they read the lines by candlelight, breath caught behind their teeth. Maybe they understand, just for a heartbeat, that the king they feared or worshipped or betrayed was, in the hush, only a boy trying to keep the softness alive where no scribe would dare record it. Or maybe the letter stays hidden forever, the ink fading, the parchment yellowing, until it becomes part of the wood grain beneath the old book. A secret only the hush keeps, the same hush that cradles the rustle of silk at midnight, the scrape of quill on parchment, the soft tap of rain against ancient glass. So tonight, as you lie there, the hush pressed gentle to your ear, think of those letters never sent, the confessions you tucked beneath your own ribcage, folded so carefully no one would ever think to pry them out. Know that they do not lose their power for never being read. Sometimes the truth that stays hidden is the one that keeps your softness breathing when the world demands you carve it away. Close your eyes now. The ink dries. The flame flickers. The hush keeps your secret safe. And if you ever need to write your own letter to no one, write it. Fold it. Tuck it under your pillow. Let it be your silk when the iron grows too heavy. The hush will keep it for you, just as it keeps his. Next, imagine the hush that lingers not in the words left unsent or the secrets tucked in a garden hedges, but in the one thing that never sleeps. The mirror. Picture it. Tall, old, warped in its silvered backing by centuries of candle smoke and rough cloths wiping away the breath of countless kings. It stands in Henry's chamber, framed in carved vines and tiny cherubs. Their faces so smooth by time, they look almost cruel in the wrong light. A gift, they said once. An heirloom from a foreign queen who swore it would hold a king's greatness forever. But what the courtiers never understood is that the mirror keeps more than reflections. It keeps the hush. When the doors are locked and the silk gown is slipped from its hidden chest, it is the mirror that watches. When Henry stands barefoot on the cold flags, his shoulders soft and unguarded, the mirror sees. It does not bow. It does not flatter. It does not weigh him with a crown or armor. It only shows him what he dares not let the rest of the world see. Imagine him there on a sleepless night, the hush curling around his ankles like a patient cat. The silk robe slides over his skin, the fabric catching the firelight so it seems to glow from within. He steps closer, bare feet soundless on the stones, and studies the figure staring back at him. Familiar, yet not. Sometimes he hates the mirror, hates how it shows the raw edge of his collarbone, the tired bruises beneath his eyes, the pale line where the crown presses too tight. He hates that it sees the tremor in his fingers when he touches the lace at his throat, that it reflects back the shiver he feels when he drags the brush through his hair. And yet, the mirror never looks away, never gasps like the courtiers might, never trades what it knows for favors whispered in the council chamber. It simply holds him, whole, in all the ways the kingdom never can. He steps closer, so close that his breath fogs the glass, a ghostly halo that blooms and fades, blooms and fades. He remembers standing here as a boy, when the crown was still too big, when his father's ghost loomed over every reflection. Back then, he'd press his palms to the glass and pretend it might open if he knocked hard enough. A door to a world where softness was not something to be bartered away for loyalty and blood. Now older, wiser, more tired, he knows it is no door, but it is a witness. He lifts the edge of his robe, studying the drape across his shoulders the way it gathers at his waist. He tilts his head, studying the man who stares back, a king wrapped in silk, chainmail heart hidden under rose water and the hush of night. Sometimes he talks to it, voice low enough that even Elias, dozing by the hearth, does not stir. He asks the mirror questions he'd never dare utter to the courtiers who clink goblets in the feasting hall. Will they remember this softness? Will they see that the silk did not weaken the steel, but wrapped it in something they could never quite touch? The mirror does not answer, but the hush does. It presses against his skin in that breath between candle flickers, reminding him that the softness is not weakness. It's the truth that keeps the iron from turning brittle. He leans in until his forehead brushes the cold glass. His breath clouds it over, smudging the figure staring back. For a heartbeat, he cannot see the crowned shadow on his brow, only the curve of a man who might have been if the kingdom had asked less of him. When the flame guttered low, the hush wraps him tighter. He wipes the fog away with the back of his sleeve, the same silk now creased and stained with the oil of his skin. He sees himself again, clearer this time. Not king, not boy, not ghost. Just a man who keeps his softest truths stitched beneath the seams of his robe, where no blade can cut them free. And a mirror? It keeps its secrets. It keeps the hush. Long after he slips away to his bed, it holds that reflection in its old, silvered glass, a promise that some things do not vanish with daylight. So tonight, as you lie warm beneath your own hush, think of the mirror that knows too much but never speaks. Think of the parts of yourself you glimpse only when the world is dark and soft, and so still you can hear your own breath bounce back to you. Remember, the hush keeps you whole, even when the day demands you break apart. Sleep easy now. Let the mirror stand watch. It will keep your secrets, just as it keeps his, safe in silver, wrapped in silk, waiting for you when the hush comes again. Next, drift with me into the one place in this entire castle where the hush feels almost alive. A place where it drips from shelves stacked so high they seem to scrape at the rafters, where the scent of old vellum and ink mixes with the faintest ghost of candle smoke and leather bindings cracked by 100 winters. The Royal Library, a cavern of words built to hold every truth worth recording, and all the lies the scribes didn't dare keep out. It sits nestled in the oldest wing, where the stone floors slope just slightly, as if they too remember the days before there were books to weigh them down. Picture Henry here after the courtiers have vanished behind heavy doors, after the last of the candles in the corridors has sputtered out. He comes barefoot, the silk gown trailing behind him catching on the ridged flagstones like a whisper that does not want to be left behind. The guards never question him. They bow low, pretending not to see the glimpse of bare ankle, the soft slosh of rosewater perfume that lingers in his wake. Maybe they think the king comes here to read the great treaties, the endless ledgers of grain and taxes and troop movements that keep the realm from slipping into the sea. But the truth drifts much softer than that. He does not care for the ledgers tonight, not for the stern Latin prayers bound in stiff covers, or the bloodless genealogies that tie him in knots to every noble family within 500 miles. Tonight, he slips deeper to the shelves that know steward catalogs, the ones where the pages are frayed and the ink smudged by hands that trembled long before his ever did. There are books here that no bishop ever blessed, volumes stitched together by candlelight, copied from older scraps brought by traders who spoke in riddles and vanished when the snow fell too hard. Books of old myths, of strange gods and softer kind of magic, the sort that do not care for crowns but seem to hum when a man kneels alone in the dark and asks for something gentler than iron. He drags a ladder to the furthest alcove, a little niche tucked behind a half-rotted tapestry of a saint whose eyes are long scratched away by moths. Here, he runs his fingertips along the spines until they come away dusty, the smell of old parchment catching in his throat like a memory. He picks one, a book so battered the leather cover peels away like shed skin. He sits on the cold floor, silk pooling around him, the hush pressing close as the first page sighs open. There are no scribes here, no bishops, no enemies at the gate. Just a man and a story that no one would believe if he read aloud at court. Sometimes it's a tale of kings who dressed in gowns spun from spider silk, who ruled not with swords but with honey and words so soft they slipped under armor like a lover's hand. Sometimes it's about witches who blessed those kings, who told them their softness would outlast the iron, would trick time itself into forgetting where the blade ended and the silk began. The hush in the library is different than the hush in his chamber. Here it breathes. The pages rustle when no breeze should stir them. The candles burn low but never quite gutter out, as if the books themselves like to see the shape of the king curled on the flagstones, one shoulder pressed to the wall to soak up its ancient chill. Now and then, Elias finds him there, slipping in from the shadowed corridor, boots leaving tiny splashes of melted snow behind. He never speaks at first. He only crouches beside Henry, brushing the fringe of the gown aside to sit close, his warmth seeping through the hush. He reads over Henry's shoulder, lips moving silently, eyes narrowing at lines that promise a kingdom softer than this one dares to be. "It's only a story," Elias will murmur, voice low enough that it seems to sink straight into the spines of all those waiting books. "You know that." But Henry just smiles, tired and real in the hush that belongs to no one else. "So is every kingdom," he says, "once. And for a while they stay like that. Two shadows, hunched over pages no one else would ever think to find. A king draped in silk. A man with calloused hands tracing old words about a future that hums like a prayer between candle flickers. When the fire in the grate burns low and the frost claws at the leaded windows, they slip the book back onto its crooked shelf. Henry presses his hand to the spine, as if promising the story he will return, that he will not let it die in the dark, that he will keep its hush tucked under his skin where no iron can reach. So tonight, as you lie there with your blanket warm around your shoulders, think of that library. Think of the stories you carry that no one else dares to believe. The soft places in you that speak louder than any crown when the hush comes close. Let the hush hold you now. Let it remind you that some pages will always rustle in the dark, waiting for the king, or the soul, brave enough to come barefoot, wrapped in silk, to read them when the rest of the world sleeps. Some stories were never meant for the scribes. They're for you, and the hush will keep them safe until you're ready to whisper them back into the light. And now, drift with me to the hour just before the first cock crows. That thin slice of time when the world holds its breath, as if the stones themselves wish they could stay wrapped in the hush forever. Picture the castle before dawn, the courtyards slick with frost, the torchlight at the gates sputtering its last before the sun pushes it away. In the kitchens, scullery maids rub sleep from their eyes as they stoke hearths that never truly go cold. A stable boy curses under his breath as he tries to rouse a horse that has no wish to carry anyone into the gray chill just yet. And up in the tallest chamber, behind a door so thick even rumors must knock twice before slipping under it, Henry sits at the window. He hasn't slept, not really. Sleep drifts in and out like a shy guest, never staying long enough to claim him fully. Instead, he lets the hush settle in his lap like a loyal hound, warm against the chill seeping through the old glass. The silk gown he slipped into hours ago still drapes across his shoulders. Its hem trails across the rushes, tangled with rose petals from a bloom he plucked in the garden maze and tucked behind his ear for no one to see but the hush. He rubs it now between his thumb and forefinger, the petals crumbling soft as old secrets that refuse to fade completely. Outside the window, the sky shifts, dark blue to soft bruised lavender, then the faintest wash of pale peach that clings stubbornly to the eastern edge. The dawn wants to come. It always does. But for these last few breaths, the hush stands its ground. Imagine Henry's reflection in the glass. Faint, ghost-like, layered over the blurred courtyard below. In that reflection, the crown is nowhere to be seen. The iron scepter and the ledgers full of demands wait on his desk, untouched for now. Here, he is simply a man wrapped in softness that does not ask him to be more than his beating heart. Sometimes he wonders, not out loud, not even to Elias curled under the firs nearby, if the hush might come with him into the sunlit hours. If he could stand at the top of the stone steps, silk brushing his boots, the scent of rose water clinging like defiance. If the people would see the softness for what it truly is, a promise that the kingdom does not belong to iron alone. But he knows what the scribes would do with such a sight. How the rumor would twist itself like ivy around the walls until it squeezed the hush right out of his chest. So he keeps it here instead, tucked in the folds of the silk, stitched into letters never sent, hidden between the pages of forbidden books. He keeps it for himself, and for you, too, if you're willing to let the hush slip under your skin. Picture him now, rising from the window seat, the cold floor biting at his bare soles. He moves to the hearth where the last embers glow like the memory of a dream he refuses to surrender. He stirs them once, watches the sparks drift up the chimney, carrying some small piece of his hush into the dawn. Elias stirs behind him, blinking away sleep, eyes soft with the kind of loyalty that no scribe can ink into a decree. He does not question the silk, the petals, the rose water that lingers even now. He simply rises, wraps an arm around Henry's shoulders, and stands with him at the window. Together, they watch the frost slip from the courtyard flagstones, the first servant crossing the yard with a bundle of firewood too heavy for one pair of shoulders. And so the kingdom wakes. The council will gather. The ledgers will open like old wounds. The crown will return to its place, pressing the hush into the raw line along his brow. But for this heartbeat, this hush, Henry stands unburdened, silk draped across his spine like the memory of every king who ever dared to be more than iron and less than stone. So tonight, when you close your eyes and feel the dawn pressing at the edges of your own hush, remember this: the world will always knock. The iron will always call, but the hush stays. It waits behind locked doors, between the pages of stories you've yet to write, in the soft rustle of silk across your skin when no one else is watching. Let it remind you that you, too, carry a secret softness stronger than any crown. That the hush is yours, now and always, no matter how loud the world grows when the sun comes up. Sleep easy. Let the hush hold you. And when the dawn knocks, answer it knowing that some truths remain wrapped in silk, breathing just beneath your ribs, impossible to steal. The hush stays. The hush is yours.